wanted to make a video for you guys to go through those highlighted problems that we did in class for section 10-3. So here's the first one that we did. We wanted to factor completely 15x squared minus 5x minus 10. So the first thing you do is factor out the GCF. There's no variable in common with all three terms, but we do have the factor of 5 that is in common with all three terms. So we can factor out a 5, and we're left with 3x squared minus x minus 2. Now we need to see if we can factor the remaining quadratic equation, or not quadratic equation, quadratic polynomial. So 3x squared minus x minus 2, that looks like it factors into, let's see, we need negative 2 is our last term, so we're going to need 1 and 2 are going to be our factors, and it looks like we should have negative 1 here and 2 here, because that'll get us negative 3x and 2x as our middle terms, which will add to give us negative x in the middle. So it looks like we have 5 times x minus 1 times 3x plus 2. And that is our answer, completely factored. All right, now we have 4x squared minus 100. So the GCF between 4x squared and 100 is 4. So if you factor out a 4, we're left with x squared minus 25. Now the remaining polynomial is a difference of two square numbers, so that factors into 4 times x plus 5 times x minus 5. And there's our answer. All right, we have this polynomial 8a squared minus 16ab minus 20b squared. So this one has two variables now, but it doesn't look like there's any variables in common between all three terms. There's only an 8 in common between all three terms. So we factor out an 8. So we have 8 times a squared minus 2ab minus, what is that? It's 120 divided by 8. Minus 15b squared. Okay, now let's factor the remaining polynomials. But again, I just like to use the area model. And we need a squared as our first term and negative 15b squared as our last term. So that means that it's going to have to be a and a. And then since we need b squared in our last term, we know we're going to have a variable b in those two spots as well, because then b times b gives us b squared. We need two numbers that multiply to give us negative 15 and add to give us negative 2. So that's going to have to be negative 5 and 3. So as you can see, when you do 3b times a, you get 3 times a times b. And when you do negative 5b times a, you get negative 5ab. So then negative 5ab plus 3ab will get you negative 2ab for your middle term. So this completely factors into 8 times the quantity a plus 3b times the quantity a minus 5b. Okay, our next one, we want to make sure we factor out the GCF first. So it looks like we can factor out an x and a y from both terms. So it would be x times y times x squared minus y squared. Okay, and then x squared minus y squared is a difference of two squares. So that just factors into x minus y times x plus y. And there's your completely factored answer. Okay, this next one, let's factor out our GCF. So we have a GCF of 6 from both terms, and we can't factor out any c's because it's not in the second term, but we can factor out an x squared because that is in both terms. So 6x squared is our GCF, and we're left with c squared minus 100d squared. Okay, c squared minus 100d squared, again, is a difference of two squares. Because if you take the square root of 100d squared, you get 10d. So it's going to factor into c plus 10d times c minus 10d. And there we have our completely factored answer. Okay, if you didn't notice that it was a difference of two squares right off the bat, you could have, again, set up the area model. Okay, we know we need c squared as our first term and negative 100d squared as our last term, and we know we need our middle terms to cancel out, so the only way to do that is to have two opposite numbers. So the only way that you can get negative 100 is if you multiply negative 10 by 10. And then again, you need a d squared, so it's got to be 10d and negative 10d. And then for our first terms, c and c, to get c squared. And then when you multiply it out, negative 10 times d times c is negative 10 cd. And then 10d times c is 10 cd. And you can see that 10 cd plus negative 10 cd, those cancel each other out. And you have c squared minus 100d squared. So that factors into our c plus 10d times c minus 10d. So there's another way to do it. And I just added in this last one. If I'm looking at all three terms, I can factor out a 3. And I can also factor out an x cubed because there's enough x cubes in each of those terms to take that out. So 3x cubed is our GCF, and we're left with x squared plus 2xy minus 45 divided by 3 is 15y squared. Okay, and then we just have to factor what's left. So that looks like it factors into x squared is our first term, negative 15, y squared is our last term. So we need, again, two factors of negative 15 that add to 2. So, well, here, let's get our x's in there, because x times x is x squared. And then we also need our y's in there to get our y squared in our last term. And then it looks like we're going to need 5 and negative 3. So 5y and negative 3y. And that will get us our negative 15y squared in our last term. And for our middle terms, we'll get 5xy and negative 3xy, which add together to get our 2xy. So it looks like our final answer is 3x cubed times x minus 3y times x plus 5y.